Our story begins in 1851. At the time, the United Kingdom was at the height of its industrial and economical revolution. And to showcase this to the world, it wanted to organize a great exhibition in which manufacturers, artists, and engineers from across the world could come to share their inventions. An event of this scale required a venue of unprecedented dimensions. And so, a public competition was created for the design of such a space. The challenge was twofold. The building had to be erected in 18 months, and they either had to be easy to manufacture or easy to relocate. Every proposal was eventually rejected, and as the situation grew more dire, one of the committee members, Joseph Paxton, was suddenly inspired by his garden's greenhouse. In a piece of paper, he drew what he imagined, a three-story tall building made out of glass plane and cast iron that could be easily mass-manufactured and assembled on-site. After some convincing, the committee approved his design, and his proposal became what is now known as the Crystal Palace, the largest glass structure built by mankind at the time. What I'm trying to tell with this story is that the idea of cross-border interdisciplinary collaboration was being thrown around back in the Victorian times, and that the places where connections could happen could have humble beginnings like that of a garden. So today, I'm not going to be talking about me reinventing the wheel, but instead, it's us rediscovering it. Because there does seem to be something we've lost over the last century, a fundamental connection with the nature that we come from. Let me ask some questions. Raise your hand if you've been to some kind of team building activity, an induction week, a freshers fair, a team workshop at work. Okay, now raise your other hand if you've been to some kind of sustainability event, a conference, a panel, or a climate cafe. Keep your hands up if this event happened outdoors. Right. I used to go to a lot of these kind of events, and I always find them incredibly useful. It was a great way to learn about the problems and solutions that people were facing, and also connect with others and even vent. But the more I went to them, the more disheartened I grew. Because we were failing to turn all that talking into some walking. We were getting into this altered state of minds, but we were not turning them into altered traits and habits. And the events themselves are paradoxical in nature. You see, they were all hosted by organizations, and they were all indoors in buildings. And when we left the rooms, we would leave them in disarray. The tables would have been moved, the bins would be full, and there would be leftovers, food, and drinks everywhere. But I know if I go to that room the day after, it'll be pristine. The carpets would have been vacuumed, the windows wiped, and the bins emptied. And this is because these organizations have incredible support networks that maintain the spaces where collaborations can occur. But now, in order to have sustainable conversations, we need an unsustainable infrastructure to support them. This realization left a bitter aftertaste at the end of each one of these events, and it devalued the meaningful conversations that were happening in these places. So I set myself a challenge. Can I come up with one example of a place with the following three properties? It has to be regenerative, so that when the space is used, it heals, not degrades. It has to be cyclic, so when one person uses it, it encourages others to do more in it. And it has to be binding. The space has to create a collective sense of belonging and ownership across all of its users. Such a space I will call a grounds for growth. And it's the perfect example of a place where sustainable conversations can happen in a sustainable infrastructure. As I began to imagine some kind of futuristic solution, I realized I had already stumbled upon such a space during my undergraduate years. Edible Campus is an eco-gardening society here at Lancaster University, led by students for students. The 25-year-old society was established originally to reconnect people with the production of food, but it soon outgrew its scope. With a fully kitted barn with a wood workshop, community area, raised beds, polytunnel, chicken coop, and beehives, the place was a space for experimentation. I joined for the first time during my second year, in a bid to escape the post-COVID isolation. At the barn, I found some of the most amazing people that shaped and continue to shape the way I live. I wanted to give back to this community, and so I ran for president. My slogan being something along the lines of gardening for all. I wanted to scale our activities so more people could experience what I had experienced the year before. During my tenure, our committee grew the society to become the third largest student group at university, and we were awarded the Sustainability Award from the Students' Union. But it was during this time that I was enlightened to the power and the role the community gardens can play in the future of enterprise and innovation. It was a particularly busy summer day. 38 people had showed up to volunteer at our garden. Our previous activities averaged 15 to 20, and now we had twice that amount. I was super excited because our marketing was clearly paying off. But then one of our committee members, that was a bit more of a realist, came up to me and said, "Hey, what should we tell them to do?" And that's when I started thinking, what the hell do you tell 40 people to do? We had enough tools and manpower to take over the local government. So I decided to use this force for good and make a statement about our financial sustainability. You see, we had just run out of our premium mushroom compost. And instead of buying some more, we wanted to make our own by combining topsoil from the chicken coop that was rich in phosphorus with organic matter from the shame pile, which is where we threw all the leftovers of our harvest. I pitched this idea to the group and everyone seemed on board. And so soon enough, people grabbed forks, spades, and wheelbarrows, and we marched out of the barn. And it looked a lot like a children's parade. It's just that now our toys were adult-sized. I introduced everyone to their role. And as they became comfortable in what they were doing, a supply chain was created. And let me say, it was beautiful, it was magnificent, and it worked. And as everyone became comfortable, I started moving around, and it was in this loop that I was suddenly struck by a light bulb moment. One of our volunteers had placed themselves in the junction where wheelbarrows from the shame pile and the chicken coop met. And they were asking to each carrier, do you carry shame or shit? I was stunned because this was a sign of emergence. This ecosystem that the volunteers had created was now conscious enough to be able to optimize and fix its own mistakes. We had to make sure that the ratio between chicken manure and organic matter stayed on a 2-to-3 ratio. And this volunteer took action without any kind of external output to make sure that that ratio was conserved. This kind of behavior is what mega corporations wish they had in their offices. And here, in a humble garden, it happened organically. By the end of our activity, our volunteers moved over 1 ton of soil from one place to another. And they provided us with the resources necessary to grow the next harvest. More importantly, is that people that had never met before were now smiling, talking, and connecting with each other. From our garden, we saw the emergence of startups, research ideas, friendships. I met my girlfriend there, and there was a marriage, just not mine. And it is this value where people came to the garden for some personal gain, like relaxation, well-being, taking some fresh air, that then got turned into staying for the culture that the garden created across all of its users. One of our volunteers summarized it in one beautiful sentence. I came for the vegetables, but I stayed for the people. This is why I believe that community gardens are a grounds for growth. And they are the spaces in which the future of sustainability has to be talked about. As I was leaving Lancaster, I pledged that I would start a garden wherever I went. And now, at Imperial, I work with Reverend Andrew Wilson to build what could become one of the largest community gardens in central London. Andrew's theory as to why gardening can create such inclusive and safe spaces comes from that of perspective. You see, when we talk, we do it face to face, creating a sense of me and you. But when we garden, we do it side by side, and now there's only us and the goal. It is this shift in perspective that helps us overcome internal barriers and walls and connect with the person next to us as for who they are, a human being. My theory as to why gardens can play such impactful roles in the future comes from the role that agriculture has had in human history. Agriculture not only allowed us to grow more food for more people, it enabled us to settle down. No longer were we confined to endlessly roam the continent in search of nourishment. Now, any patch of land with suitable enough conditions could become a sustainable source of sustenance. And it is in this transition from our nomadic habits that people develop what is called cathedral thinking. Our plans are no longer day to day, they're season to season, and we begin to accumulate knowledge over generations in the form of tools and stories that we can tell to others. These tribes evolve and become great civilizations in which economies, traditions, and religions are created. It is in our nature to tender a piece of land together, and it is this intrinsic property of us that makes connections at the garden so intuitive and meaningful. However, today, gardening is industrialized. It's either a purely utilitarian tool to produce more food, or it is a commodity available to a lucky few. But I envision a future in which community gardens are not just overlooked spaces, but are instead used by neighborhoods, families, and teams to create a collective culture. So that when they leave the garden to do amazing things and they inevitably run into a brick wall, they won't fracture into individual components, but instead plow through it as a single unit. What I hope you take from this talk is the inspiration to peek over the garden wall. Because every neighborhood has a community garden that is desperate for your help and your attention. And if your work or university doesn't have such spaces, I challenge you to make them. It could be in a rooftop, it could be in a wall, it could be in a balcony. Nature will grow anywhere. And if you think you don't have what it takes to build such spaces, I'd like to remind you that when Joseph Paxton suggested the idea of the Crystal Palace, he was grilled by the committee over his skills as an engineer to deliver a project of this scale. To which he answered something along the lines, well, no one has ever tried to build a 3-story tall building made out of nothing but glass and iron before in the history of mankind. So there really isn't any expert out there. And there really isn't any expert out there on making gardens either. So I hope to see you all at the garden, and thank you for listening.